the people that we have as active participants. So out of the 38 of us, we basically 9 of the 38 are originally from the US, and we have a variety of other countries from India and Bangladesh and China to Jordan and Iran and Benin and a number from from Africa. I'm only sampling here. We have Zimbabwe and Benin, and we have South America and Argentina and Colombia, and Europe from Greece and Spain, and people from Australia. So we have quite a different range. It's great. It's an international crowd, even though all of us are in the States. And out of the people here, we have 9 from academia, 4 from industry, and 25 are from national labs. So a preponderance of national labs folks. So we're great. Any key concerns or feedback of something that we should pay attention to today to do better than we did yesterday? Make it more workable for you? No? Well, thanks for the endorsement that it was done 100% perfectly. Sunita, anything else you want to say? Maybe we don't have, Sunita had, I think, a conflict. She's running another workshop. So Mazin, any other logistic details or anything we need to work through today?
Yeah, just if people can, I can see that some people are still in using their full name, but if you can look at the landing page that we shared with you, so and then rename yourself with the group name _ your name, then I can put you into the breakout rooms, and basically then we will prefer when the time comes for the group discussion. And something else, those who ask question about writing NSF proposal, Almadena actually shared some tips with us. I posted on the Slack channel and the general channel, so feel free to have a look at it.
Okay. All right, then I think we're ready, Matthew and David, if you want to take it away.
People would like to have a small break in the middle.
Okay, sounds good.
One feedback. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand.
Right. Are people seeing my slides now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right, welcome to day 2. This is the second part of the communications program, and thank you to everybody for coming and asking lots of great questions in the Slack channel during the panel yesterday. I'm going to be talking a little bit, and then we have an exercise that David Bernhold is going to be running around some of the possibilities and ways to think about organizing communications. So in particular, as I was teasing at the end of the panel yesterday, there are different types of communications, and a lot of what we were talking about there had to do with the very external, broader impact, and thinking about how you structure a way to talk and build a community that you're talking to. And we know a bunch of different sorts of things that were also showing up in the questions. How do you communicate with social media posts? How do you think about web blurbs? How does that tie into proposals? And a one practice that can be very useful when you're starting your career and you're trying to figure out, actually strike that, one practice that's useful at any point in your career, including when you're starting out, is to think about being able to communicate what you're interested in and what you're trying to do in a number of different formats. And one that has a fair amount of traction is something called 3330. There's another version of this that goes by 333, and we'll get there in a second. But the idea is, can you talk to somebody for 30 seconds and explain very quickly at a high level what's interesting and what it is that you're trying to do, why there's a problem, what you're trying to solve? Can you do that and get into a little more depth in a concise 3-minute version? And are you prepped to do that for a full 30-minute long presentation? So we're going to focus on the shorter end, because most of us, by the time you get through school and you're in your early phase of the career, the 30-minute presentation, standing up, giving a talk, talking, going through a paper review in a class, that 30-minute sort of talk format is something that we get used to. The process of really trying to refine that down into the shorter forms isn't just a matter of slicing out the best 3 minutes from your 30-minute talk or the best 30 seconds from your 3-minute talk. Each of those are very different sorts of activities. And you may have heard some of this kind of 3-minute conversation different ways. TED Talks are an example of that. Pecha Kucha is an example of that. Lightning Talks are an example of that. The 30-second is an elevator pitch. It's your sound bite. It's the tell your grandma what you're doing. It's the quick abstract version of it. And the reason those aren't just some subset of the 30-minute talk most of the time is that a lot of us have been trained that what you're trying to do, that the purpose, the core intent, and how you're trying to solve the problem is implicit in all of the constructive thing you're describing. I did this and I did this and we measured that and we did the other. And so you implicitly see kind of by construction what you're trying to get in a full 30 minutes. However, if you're just talking for 30 seconds or 3 minutes, you can't let it be implicit. You have to be very explicit. You have to be concise. And to invoke Almudena, you don't want to try to be cute. You want to try to focus in and have a clean description of what you're trying to do. And if so far this isn't making things clear enough, it's easy to fall into the trap that, oh, it's short. It'll be simple to just figure the long part out and pull this little bit out at the end after I've done everything else. Write my whole paper and I'll throw the abstract together in the last 5 minutes before it's due. If we were in a room, I'd probably have everybody raise their hands if you'd ever gotten to the point where you'd done that, but we'll let the anonymity of the internet protect our egos for the moment. So what I'll say is, again, like making a good picture, and this came out in the panel too, a good picture can replace pages worth of words. A good elevator pitch, getting it right, can take as much time as putting together a whole 30-minute presentation, because you're doing something different and you have to think about it differently. Now, if you go through that process frequently, it helps make your 30-minute long presentation better. But that doesn't, you go one way is a lot easier than going from the other. So if I'm trying to do something in short form, and incidentally, I am paying attention in the Slack channel as best I can. And if you have questions or thoughts as we're going along, please do throw them in. What are you trying to do in a short form talk, be it 30 seconds or 3 minutes? It's easier to think about 3 minutes, frankly, most of the time, just because 30 seconds is so little. You need to talk about what your problem is, what it's relevant to, who will care, what your solution does, what measurement you've had. Those should all sound very familiar. It's very similar to things that you're going to be doing in writing papers and all those sorts of pieces. But when you're doing something in a really short form, one of the big things is that it's not just an abstract, this is a question that needs to be answered. What you need to try to figure out a way to convey of all of the constellation of questions that are out there, all of the interesting things that are happening, you've chosen that this is the one you want to hammer on next. Why? What is it about this that is compelling to you? What is the decision process that led you to think that this is the way, this is the thing that should be addressed? And you also want to focus on the capability you're developing to address that, not the particular solution. Kind of hear my example here. High throughput computing, it's a thing, it's a capability, it's something you're aiming towards, not, hey, I've got this chunk of software. Maybe you describe how you implemented the capability if they care. But when you're doing your initial pitch, the fact that there's something you can point to may or may not be relevant if they don't understand what foo, whatever your software is actually good for. And so all of this is geared towards, before you get to the details, give your listener a framework, give them a map so that they can understand where you're coming from. The downside to this, and it is a huge downside, is that you actually have to know where you're coming from before you can explain it to them. And from long practice in my own life and from working with lots of other people in this, it's very hard to figure that out until you've butted your head against this a bunch of times, trying to explain where you're coming from and having it fall flat. Because until you try to explain it, it's too easy for you to say, oh yeah, well that was a thing I did because that makes sense. So I'm over here in the problem now. Keeping the larger context is important though. So easy traps to fall into. Assume that your audience already knows what you know, so that if you say that, obviously, the spectrum of the crystal X-ray crystallography should look like, well, maybe they know that, maybe they don't. It can be really easy for people, particularly early But even in any stage, to kind of figure you're so deep into it that everything looks obvious to you. You know all of this in and out, and you've forgotten why it's challenging and interesting. And so you don't even want to talk about it. And, it's also really easy to fall into a hole where you think that you're not the right person to talk about this, that, so many other people have made big contributions. This cuts to the imposter syndrome issues that we were discussing yesterday too. So all of these can make it hard for you to sit down and try to work on this and try to think about it. And so part of what I'm going to do in the next couple minutes is hopefully give you a couple of patterns, a couple of templates, some suggestions that you can use as a way to get over writer's block and to think about, how do I take the next step? You're not going to make it perfect in one step, but how do I stop from getting blocked on even starting down that way? So templates are good, and they can get really corny if you use them overly aggressively, but here are a few things to help get you started. So the first one is really something you have seen. You just probably haven't seen this acronym, IMRAD, IMRAD. And it just stands for Introduction, Motivation, Results, Discussion. And all of us have probably written papers or technical reports or other things that have had sections with exactly those titles for a reason. It's a way, it's a template for trying to get started on what's a narrative. How do you get into understanding how to start, how to convey where you are, what did you do about it, and what did you learn? But it's also pretty easy to have this sound more like what a young child would write for their school report of what I did over my summer vacation. I did a thing and then a thing, and then there was a thing, and I went there, and then it was all done. And it's really hard for someone to build that shared context with someone if all you're giving them is kind of those technical litany of details. That doesn't mean you can't write a really compelling narrative that's open to everybody using this template. You very much can. And if you know that you're talking to someone in your discipline, it's short and quick and is a better way to get into it. Yep. Another template that is really useful, and in particular, kind of the first couple, is what's known as the HEILMEIER CATECHISM. And HEILMEIER was a DARPA program director for many years, and he formalized this as a set of questions that he pushed onto all of his program managers when they're reviewing proposals. So, proposal is long form. Why are we talking about it in short form? If you look at those first 4 questions there, they're really short form questions. What are you trying to do? Say it with no jargon. What happens today? Why isn't this going to be fixed just because Amazon will fix it for us? which is normally the question that gets asked in kind of my personal area. But, you know, again, I think we all have kind of those equivalents depending on your areas of research. What is new and who's going to care? You know, what is it you want to do and why will anybody care if you're successful? These are kind of core things that you're conveying about the message that we've already seen. And, you know, as David points out in the Slack channel, there's an awful lot of this that's kind of the inverse of the way you normally are trained to talk about it. Your intent is to start with, I built a really cool hammer, and you get into the cool hammer, and it's only at the very end that you say, oh, by the way, there were nails that people had to have a hammer for. And this is about consciously trying to subvert that. And I'll tell you, and we were touching on this a little bit in the into the panel, as a reviewer, this sort of short form compressed view is extremely important in a proposal, because even if you get a reviewer who very conscientiously sits down and tries to read your proposal from front to back in one go, when you get back and you sit in a room with other people and you're going through all of the reviews, you need a hook to remind you of the 15 proposals that you just looked at, which one was this? And if you can put in a really clear pitch in the first half page of your proposal so that they flip to that front, they go, oh yeah, this one, it will make a huge difference in your success. Because if they have to dig through it to figure out what's going on, you've already lost. And then finally, this is kind of the integrated template. I'm leaning really heavily on the work that Randy Olson has done. I really like his book. I had a chance to see him give a keynote at a couple conferences, and something about the way he approaches this really clicked with me. He's got a great TED Talk that you can get through in 9 minutes. And kind of the core of his template is this ABT that he calls it. That's, can you express what you're trying to do as a narrative that just has 4 statements connected with and, but, and therefore. The and the therefore tend to be very easy for us. The importance of the but is that it creates the tension for the narrative, so that you are conveying to the listener, so what? You're conveying to them, what is the key problem that you're trying to address? And it fits really well with those HEILMEIER questions that we were just looking at. You know, you can think of it as, you know, hey, there's a problem I've seen, and there are people who are going to be impacted, but the state of the art isn't going to solve it. Therefore, here's my solution. There's also, you can mix it up, you know, there's a community that cares, and I have a solution that can be applied, but there are fundamental issues. Therefore, we can't just depend on the state of the art to fix this. And all of these are really, again, tying into your motivation, not just stating, there's a thing and another thing, and we could do a thing. It's, you know, I see something, there are people who have a need, and how that drives the motivation. So I promised one bonus. And it is in some ways the easiest to explain, and in other ways the absolute hardest to do. If you can make this template work for you, it's really great though. If you can say nothing in your area makes sense, except in the light of what it is you want them to do. So this comes from Dobzhansky, where the statement was originally nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution, which puts a very clear box around what is the core concern that you think someone should be thinking about when you're talking about this area. But making that work is really hard. In terms of my personal space, I work in data management, and after lots and lots and lots of beating at this, the best I have to say is nothing in scientific data management makes sense except in the light of the reader. And I don't like that. But, it's capturing the fact that, look, scientific data management doesn't make sense unless you're caring about who you're managing it for. It takes a lot of work to try to distill down to a single statement, but it's an extremely impactful one if you can get it right. So in terms of getting it right, none of this is a one and done. None of this is a case where your first draft is the final draft is the best draft. You need to try your short communication. You need to try your talks. You need to figure out what gets misunderstood, what just goes straight over people's heads, where it is that the words you want to use end up meaning something completely different in somebody else's discipline. And so what you're saying is understood, but not in the way you intended it to be. So the kind of final tip for this part is you really need to be conscious and make an effort to find a group of people that you can practice these communication exercises with, that you can practice refining your story, practice refining why you think your research, your work, your technical field is what you want to do. And, you can lean on mentors, you can lean on people from your undergraduate or graduate school, you can lean on professionals. I think that's an important part from Daniel's conversation in the panel yesterday. There are people in your institutions, regardless of what type of institution it is, who do this for their day job, and you can work with them. Or, people who might even be sitting in this very room. There are opportunities for you to connect in Slack and the LinkedIn group and all sorts of other ways to put together collaborations of people who can share and listen, offer feedback, and be open without ego to hear both where your work fell flat and where you're comfortable saying, I see where you're going, but I don't understand. And have them hear that and be able to work through it until everybody's happy. And I will kind of wind that up with just asking people to participate in something like that can be awkward. And, there's always the simple approach of if you offer to do it for them first, They may socially be willing to engage and let you practice as well. And you can also just blame me, say, hey, there was this guy and he said this was a good idea. So what do you think? You want to try it? All right. So one of the things we would have loved to have done is to be able to break into groups and have you practice some of this on your own. But that's really hard for people to come up with on the spur of the moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one particular part of that short form that is the abstract, something that we've all had to do, and we're going to look at that in a little more depth and try to apply some of these analysis criteria that we've just gone through to that particular form of short communication. And with that, I am going to go ahead and throw it back over to David Bernholt, who's going to take us through the next part and then get us into the breakout groups. Over to you, David.
Thank you. Hopefully my screen is sharing properly.
Yes.
Thank you. So yeah, we're going to talk about abstracts and titles of papers, probably something you've all had experience with. Before we get into this, I want to acknowledge I developed this exercise last year with Louisa Brown, and it was based largely on material provided by Davide Lopresti at the University of Nottingham. And we also crowdsourced the papers that we'll use for this exercise. So I want to thank the contributors there as well. In preparation for this breakout activity, there is a Google Drive folder called Abstracts Exercise. I put the link into our Slack channel about 10-15 minutes ago. So please look for it there and do a little bit of multitasking to get into that folder and then find the abstracts document for your assigned group and open that up, and then you'll be ready for the breakout session. So papers are important because papers are the primary means by which we communicate our research results to others, and it's also how we preserve them for posterity. There's typically, if you think about it, 3 ways we decide what papers we want to actually read. Sometimes it's based on the author. They might be written by a friend or a competitor or a luminary in the field, and we kind of feel that we should read these and pay attention to them. Oftentimes they were cited as a reference in something else you have read and you want to follow the thread. And sometimes the title attracts your attention, which is an important, maybe spurious way of getting into a paper. Paper titles are important because they affect access to the paper. So what will people turn up in search engines? Will they find the topics of the papers based on their titles? And other elements, of course. They affect the impact of your work because they will be, in a typical bibliographic citation, you only see a few things that describe the work. The main one is the title and to some extent the co-authors, right? And they show your track record, right? If you're putting together your CV, applying for a job, or writing a grant proposal, you have to include some relevant papers, things like that. And basically, the only thing you're providing about them that tells anybody about that work immediately is the title. So some quick recommendations for titles. Limit the number of words, be brief but informative. Use meaningful titles, include keywords from your manuscript. Remember that the title is the first thing that readers read, but it's probably the last thing that you should write. You probably need a working title, but you want to go back and revisit it at the end of the writing process and make sure it really reflects what you are saying in the paper. And it's good to avoid languages like a study to investigate or the effects of or comparison of. These tend not to add anything but characters to the length of the sentence. They don't add to the title. They don't add anything to the meaning or the understanding. And they tend to get kind of stilted. When I was in graduate school, there's a conference that the group I was in organized every year, and we had some jokes about some of the older researchers who would come to this regularly, and they'd stand up and ask a question, and oftentimes the questions were very stylized, right? And in the same way, some of the language in titles often gets stylized. It's just not helpful. It really kind of gets funny in a bad way. A few interesting statistics about titles. So this study back in 2011 looked at a few different aspects of paper titles and how they impact or how they correlate to the number of citations, right? They're not really drilling into exactly why this happened, but if you look on the left, you can see different punctuation characters in the title. And what I want to draw your attention to are a couple of things. On the far right of that graph is the question mark. And in the middle, well, a little bit to the left is the colon, right? Some of these other characters, plus, dash, things like that, they may be hard to avoid, especially in some fields. In chemistry, for example, reactions will often have pluses and things like that. But there are some things you have choice over whether to include, and they tend to affect or be correlated with the number of citations you get for some reason. Also, the length of the title has some interesting characteristics. You can kind of see that on the right. So you see there's a sweet spot, 30 to 40 characters, so fairly short, sweet titles tend to get significantly more citations per paper, which is also interesting. These, you know, this is not definitive in any way, but it's things to think about when you're designing titles. Now let's move on to abstracts. So abstracts are probably close in importance to the title. In some ways, the most important part. Everybody reads it. And for many cases, for better or worse, it's the only section of the paper that everybody who thinks they might be interested in the paper will read. It's a selling point for the paper. It's the, you know, like Matt was just talking about, if you're writing a proposal or something like that, you're typically having to write an abstract or a summary, and as well as, you know, some introductory material. And these are the short form things that help sell your ideas, your work, etc. So the abstract has a huge impact on the success of your paper. Reviewers decide whether to review a paper based on the title alone. In many cases, if a journal sends you a review request, oftentimes the only thing you can see is the title. Sometimes you can also see the abstract before you accept it. You know, the abstract is a really important criteria for acceptance in some journals, and many readers, as we said, decide what to read based mainly on the abstract. So some recommendations for abstracts: make sure it tells the reader what they'll find in the paper. Make it a standalone mini summary of the paper. It shouldn't, you shouldn't have to delve into the paper to get itself to get some basic information about it. The paper is often published separately. The abstract is often published separately and freely accessible in cases where the paper is not. So people will usually be able to read the abstract and the title and may not have ready access to the full paper. So really, you should convince people that they want to spend the money or spend the effort to find that paper, the full paper, by giving them a good abstract. It should be clear and concise. It's usually a single paragraph, couple hundred words, and it should be perfect English. If you're a non-native English speaker, for abstracts and also for papers, proposals, things like that, especially early in your career, it's really good to engage with a technical editor or a colleague who might be willing to help work on your English and make sure it's really well polished. Some thoughts on structuring abstracts. So basically, there's a model that you can use called context, content, and conclusions. So the context is an abbreviated introduction, 1 to 2 sentences that establishes the context of your research, right? This whole concept connects with some of the things we've just heard from Matt. States the why. Why are you working on this problem? Content explains the content of the paper. What have you done? How have you done it? And then the conclusions are the main results, the general aspects of the results. Of course, you don't have room for the complete detailed results, but you should give a quick summary. So you should aim for each piece of this, context, content, and conclusions, to be 1 to 2 sentences in length. Really try not to exceed 3 sentences for any one of the above. So a good abstract is a total of 4 to 12 sentences long. And make sure that you're getting the right keywords into your abstract as well as your title, because once again, these are the things that are most likely to be exposed to the public, searchable, and things like that. So these are the things that will help people find papers that might be relevant to their interests in the future. So what are we going to do? We're going to go into our breakout groups. I'm asking everybody to go to this abstracts exercise folder and pick up the document for your group. The documents are all the same, and what they contain is a set of 9 different abstracts from papers. And we're asking each group, just for diversity's sake, to go and start with the abstract number that applies to your group. But you can do whatever other ones you want. We'd like you to break them down into context, content, and conclusions. An easy way to do that is just to highlight the text in red. Each group has their own document, so you can work together in Google Drive and just highlight with colors right there. And you should go ahead and do that. And then you should discuss, based on the abstract, what do you think the title of the paper might be? You're probably not going to get it exactly, but there are some key ideas that you ought to be able to identify in the abstract and that you should probably want to find in the title. So you can then compare with the actual title and our decomposition, my decomposition, frankly, of the abstract. They're probably not going to be exactly the same, but you and your group should talk about this. How well do you think the abstract did at getting the point across? What would you have done differently that you think might have turned out better? And by the way, in that abstracts exercise, there's a subfolder called original papers if you actually want to look at the original source material. If you have time, pick out another abstract, do it again, and then please take these ideas home and apply them to your own paper. So we're going to take about 15 minutes for this, and just to show you what it looks like, this is abstract number 9. We have only 8 groups, so this is not the first choice for anybody. I'm just going to show, this is the abstract. You'll find this in the document. And this is how I would mark it up, just using different color coding to separate the context, the content, and the conclusions, and then figure out what you think the title is, and maybe add some comments about the abstract and how you might have done things differently. And that's it. Please go now to your groups, and we have about 15 minutes, and we'll come back for a little bit of wrap up.
Okay. Mogdan, do we start the next session on diversity then?
I believe so. Guido, you have to unmute yourself.
I'm just a sidekick to Burali, at least for the first part.
All right. So welcome to everybody, and it's a great pleasure to kick off this session. Yesterday we talked about career planning, and we had very great conversation about communications, and that continued again today. But we are now going to segue a little bit and try to touch on a topic related to diversity as it relates to people in their early career. I was actually very pleased when CJ started the session this morning by giving us some statistics. It kind of gave us a little bit of an idea, even just the number of people from different countries that are really just even attending this ACP. That was quite a reflection of how our high performance computing community in particular is really diverse in many aspects. We are going to be considering diversity when I say we say diversity in its broader term. Quite often, ideally, we want to envision a workforce environment, a workforce that includes people from various racial, ethnical, and gender and religion backgrounds, and the socioeconomic, education, cultural, and various lifestyle and etc. We tend to think about diversity in those terms, but we're gonna extend even that more to even think of people that might have different point of view. And then people think differently. So just think when that term diversity really more in that broader sense. I'm just gonna be also acknowledging that this session has been planned, and my colleague will be presenting, myself and Guido. I am Birali Runesha. I'm an associate vice president for research computing here at the University of Chicago, and I run also a research computing center. And I'm not gonna take too much of the time, but my 27, I was actually trying to count 27, 28 years in the HPC community. I've been basically a litany of different life experience that have always led me to be interested in mentoring people in their early career. So I'm just gonna give a few minutes to Guido also to say a few words, and then we're gonna kick off our program.
Thank you, Birali. So my name is Guido Juckeland. I'm heading the computational science department at a national lab in Germany, which is comparable to like a DOE lab in the US, although we call things differently. But this will be the fun part why we have actually also a panel on geographical diversity, because things are not always the same wherever you are around the globe. And so Birali and I thought that we will discover, use this session to talk about different aspects of diversity. Even though you're all attendees seem to be working in the US, which I found interesting. And this actually happened through the review process as well. So back to you, Birali.
Okay. So the discussion is gonna kind of focus a little bit around understanding diversity and inclusion in exploring career path. And like Guido also say, navigating really the intercontinental career interactions and path that many people, even working in the US, coming from different parts of the world. We put together really kind of in the next 2 hours, a really nice, good program that will kick off really the introduction by Marisol. And then we're gonna have a little bit of a panel that will span more of speaking from an experience of some of our panelists that are really engaging in very good initiatives. And then we will segue with the geographical diversity, and we're gonna conclude everything with another good talk by David that will kind of touch on AI skills presentation that we found quite useful. So without further ado, it's really my pleasure to introduce Marisol to talk about navigating and understanding diversity and inclusion in exploring career. Marisol, take it away.
Birali, do you have my slides or?
Yeah,
okay.
I can.
Sounds great. So I'll start with giving you a brief introduction as to who I am as Birali brings up the slides. I'm Marisol Gamboa. I'm currently serving in a role as Computing Workforce Manager Lead at Lawrence Livermore National Lab, but I'm a computer scientist by training. I built a career in software engineering, developing web applications to big data applications, to also managing lots of teams and developing data science solutions for numerous customers across the DoD and the DOE, Department of Defense and Department of Energy. I've been a technical lead. As a technical lead, I've had the privilege of overseeing many, not only multidisciplinary, but diverse teams. And I've had the opportunity to encourage the next generation of software engineers as they join the lab. I play a large role in our student-focused initiatives, including Data Science Summer Institute at the lab, which draws about 30 applicants every summer, but our candidate pool, I was talking earlier with Sam, is about 2,000 applicants every summer, and we only select 30 students to come and join us and expose them to new data science techniques that are ongoing inside the laboratory and across the universities. I also play a role in Computing Scholars Program, and there our goal is to increase our pipelines with underrepresented students in order to transition them to full-time employees. I've enjoyed my opportunity in guiding students, and outreach is one of my passions because my original exposure to computer science was as part of the New Mexico Supercomputer Challenge when I was in high school. So 15 years old, I touched the first computer. It was still through dial-up modem, exciting times, but without that exposure and that experience in New Mexico Supercomputing Challenge, I may never have found my career or my calling in a computer science role. So today we're going to talk about navigating and understanding diversity and inclusion in career paths. So can we go on to the next slide? So I'd like to start with explaining why diversity and inclusion is so important to Lawrence Livermore National Lab, and I'll do that with our director, Bill Goldstein's comment. As a premier research and innovation laboratory, our people are our most important asset, and we must embrace the mandate of inclusion at this critical moment. He remains committed to fostering an environment at the lab in which all employees and our collaborators and visitors are accorded the utmost respect and dignity. And like Barali mentioned earlier, I want to challenge you to see diversity much more than what we see with our physical human eyes, right? Diversity means so much more, especially at a national lab. Next slide. So I'll start with some of our values that are key to the success and, working on the kinds of missions that we have. So we are known as the New Ideas Lab. So therefore, bringing people from different intellectual backgrounds and bringing new original ideas is critically important to the success of our teams. Also leading science and technology and engineering, right? If we recruited students from the same university, you would imagine that their skills would not be very diverse. So we go to a vast number of universities so that there is, diversity in the skills that our workforce is bringing to the table. Integrity is very important, right? Because we are working for the nation, in the best interest of the people. Inclusiveness, of course, inclusiveness is what allows us the freedom to express our creative ideas, right? Different or opposing to each other. It's very important that everybody feels very inclusive in their working teams. And zeal, the enthusiasm and commitment for the lab's mission. So our scientists work so hard because they have a very, very large passion for the missions that they are currently engaged in. So next slide. So first, we probably need to start with what does diversity and inclusion mean for Lawrence Livermore National Lab? And again, diversity manifests itself in a variety of individual characteristics, beliefs, experiences, preferences, and work approaches. This goes well beyond what we see, right? The traditional gender kind of diversity that we see a lot of people talk about. Inclusion exhibits a culture all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully, have equal access to opportunities and resources, and can contribute fully to the organization's success. I think in summary, it's what our parents always told us, right? Is respect others like you expect them to respect you, right? Just treat each other as human beings equally, and take time to, understand other people's ideas and differences, because in the end, it does build a better solution, right? Next slide. So here is our demographic diversity. And I mean, I think this is evident of how diverse the lab's workforce is. One thing to note, this doesn't include contractors, people that we bring on for short periods of time to perform special skills that maybe are not needed over a 2 to 3, 5 year span. If you look at the workforce and the science and technology disciplines. You see a lot of math, physics, engineering, chemistry, life sciences, right? And even in the degrees, there's diversity in the kinds of degrees that our workforce holds. 26% PhD, master's 14%, undergraduate 25%. And then we have those with associate's degrees and non-degrees are 35%. I want to note that these are the numbers for 2019. The 2020 numbers have just come out, but I didn't have time to update the slides yet. Okay. Next slide. And again, this is a quick view by gender and ethnicity. Again, these are the visual things that we can see. The ones in the previous slides are those that make us, unique in a different way and diverse in a different way. Next slide. And I want to focus on this a little bit more. Diversity and inclusion is critical to the lab. Our multidisciplinary teams work on complex problems and important problems. And I have to say that this one bullet has really driven the large portion of my career, right? In building software teams, bringing together people with opposing views and diverse ideas, creative in a different fashion, and even with different skill sets, has been critical to the success of every software product that I've built. If I built a team with everybody thinking the way I do, then we would solve the problem one way. If I built a team with 5 individual thinkers from different regions of the countries that may or may not look differently, right? And different regions of the world, then I bring people who can see the flaws in my solutions and propose different and unique ideas that I would have never thought of. So this has been extremely critical, and I've had the pleasure of working in many diverse teams, and it does bring, some complexity, right? Challenging thoughts and challenging ideas, but it always results in a better solution. Demographic changes mean our hiring pipelines will be more diverse in the future. So this is where we focus a lot of our efforts in the community and creating, summer student opportunities and bringing summer students from not only across the country, but international students as well, to help us solve some of these difficult problems. We also host 2-week summer programs. We call them data science challenges, where we work with the local universities to expose undergraduates and underrepresented minorities to things like data science, and hopefully encourage them to either go on to grad school or explore a career at a national lab. And then this also requires an international, I can't say that word, commitment from everyone in the lab, right? So not just management. And I think this is where it's key that we take note that we all have the power to influence inclusivity, right? We all have the power to influence diversity in our workforce. We all are fully capable of encouraging people to share their unique ideas, right? Creating teams where we're comfortable with each other, we develop relationships, and we have a common goal where we have a mission in mind. And most of us, if not all of us, have a passion for the mission that we're working towards. So we already have something unique, and some common ground to build upon, and continue to be kind to each other and act respectfully to each other. Next slide. So inclusion leads to innovation. And I wanted to show this slide just briefly because, a lot of people have done a lot of research how diversity and inclusion really does build better products, right? And I hear myself saying this every summer when I bring 20 different students, from multidisciplinary backgrounds, right? To expose them to how we work inside the lab. And in 2 weeks period, we expose them to a challenge that they've never seen before, a domain maybe they have no expertise in, right? And at the end of 2 weeks, they present these solutions and they analyze the problem and they propose new ideas that our scientists haven't thought of before. And I think every time on that very last day, I think, wow, again, diversity and multidisciplinary at its best, right? And I don't know why after all these years, I'm still surprised by how much, students that have never seen this problem can accomplish in 10 days, but I'm still blown away by the results every single time. Okay, next slide. So team science. The lab heavily invests in the development of our workforce and in the practice of team science. I think it's important that not only the lab, but every organization, right? We're a team with a common goal, and it's important to, have a healthy environment where people can express their ideas, just like I said before. Mutual respect, openness, interdisciplinary teams, and external partnerships are critical to the success of every problem that we tackle. So again, it stems to us treating each other the way we expect others to treat us, right? Okay, next slide. And like I said before, everyone can make a difference, right? Everybody has the power to influence the environment they work in. We all have the power to treat each other with respect. So diversity and inclusion is in all our hands. And for those of us that are leaders, and in an early in career session like this, we have the opportunity to share our wins and share our losses and all our experiences with the early in career. So hopefully they'll have a better, career and feel more included and provide more diverse opportunities in their workforce as well. Okay, I'll open to questions.
Yes, thank you, Marisol, for this great and introductory and inspiring talk. I would encourage people to be asking some of the questions in the Slack, and we can try to accommodate them as we go. But I will want you to also, or maybe if you can conclude by maybe addressing one question that I have is, the majority of people really in their early career or seeking positions don't get a chance to have program like yours, like the one at Lawrence Livermore Lab. But at the same time, it's true that they are really facing a lot of these issues related to diversity, as we mentioned. Can you provide any maybe few or 1 or 2, 3 tips that you can give them as departing thought and think that those people should be thinking about as they encounter those challenges?
Absolutely. I think one thing that has been key in my career personally has been finding an advocate, right? And a lot of the time advocates find us, right? And it's okay to look for, not 1, but 2, but 3 advocates, and understand that we are people first, right? So we may not feel comfortable with everybody offering to, mentor us and advocate for our career. But find a person that you are comfortable with. And I've been privileged to have many advocates throughout my career, or else, being the first generation to go to college to 2 Mexican immigrants, there would have been no way for me to get anywhere without the advocates in my life.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I see we are also being running on time, maybe to get back on schedule. I'm going to suggest to allow people to be getting their questions in Slack. I'm going to bring the 2 other people, panelists to for the next section. And then after that, maybe we can have the 3 of them. We can be asking you questions, all of you at once until the end of that particular session. We're gonna be moving on, and then I'm gonna ask Sam and Sharon to be ready. We are going to start another section where we thought by providing a little bit like 2 examples of 2 people with different, also very interesting background was going to be helpful. So our first speaker is going to be Sam. Sam actually it was introduced to me not long ago, enjoyed talking to him in preparation for this. He comes from a very good background, and one that probably I'm not going to take away, it's a pitch, where he benefit a nice trajectory to where he is now. but at the same time, he's also involved with Black and AI. And he's gonna give us the perspective of his life experience and how the group is belong to is really can be used as an example. And then after that, we're gonna have a presentation by Sharon, who has been very active with women in HPC, another community that is really quite active in the HPC community. And I'm looking forward to those presentations. So Sam, it's all yours. We can't hear you.
Okay, yeah, thanks Birali, and thanks for the opportunity to speak here. And like Birali said, I came from sort of, I mean, I will speak to more to this in the course of my slide, in the sense that I've been part of SC now for 10 years, but I started out as a student, and here I am today. So I'll talk about my journey briefly. How did I get here? Both from the research perspective, but also the community effort that has helped me. Mauricio just talked about advocate. I've been a beneficiary of that. And I'm still a beneficiary of having people advocate for your cause, both when I was in grad school and since I joined Lawrence Livermore. So if you could please move to the next slide. So how did I get here? I came into the United States, got my PhD from Texas A&M in computer science, and immediately I got my PhD, I moved to ABB Corporate Research at North Carolina State University. I was there for about 2 years, and I spent a lot of time analyzing data coming from robotics and sensors and power electric grid. That was an exciting moment. And just 2 years after that, Lawrence Livermore said, oh, come and join us. And I'm going to speak to that later on. And since then, about 4 years now, I've been at Lawrence Livermore, which has been an exciting moment here in California. So next slide, please. So Lawrence Livermore, I mean, Mauricio kind of stole my pitch, so I won't spend much of time here. But if you are not in Lawrence Livermore, you are probably not in anywhere great. That's where to be right now. If you're looking for something great to do, and I'll give you an example of that. We're a federal lab and is home to the world's supercomputers and a lot of scientific, facilities. Some of the best in the world that you must have heard of. So it's a great place to be. Please, next slide. Now, so what do I do at Lawrence Livermore? Broadly, I'm working on large-scale machine learning and data analytics, which is kind of leveraging my background and research experience in big data analytics, HPC, machine learning, and robotics. These are some of the things I've worked on, both now and in the past. So currently, I'm leading a research effort in how do you do neural architecture search, but we are not talking about small scale, something you do on your laptop, because at the lab, everything is big. We do big science with big ions, which is our big supercomputers. So we have these resources. So how can we provide a scalable approach to doing the things that other people are trying to do? And I've also been lucky to, right from the beginning, to be a core member of the a deep learning toolkit we are building at Livermore, which we call Livermore Big Artificial Neural Network, LBAN. So if you are in the AI space, you can think of LBAN as PyTorch or TensorFlow on steroid, but it's dedicated for HPC machine because that's what we do. We are not trying to sell ads to you. We are trying to solve big problems. And some of them I'm going to mention on the next slide. So here are the 3 projects I've really been involved in. And this brings to the fore when you talk about diversity when it comes to teamwork. Now, one of these projects here is our effort at doing drug design that is targeting COVID-19. Now, this is now in the finalist for the Golden Bell Prize Award, which will be on next week, Thursday. So please look at the program, come and listen to what great things we are doing and how we are using machine learning to aid drug design for COVID-19. And that is one example of when you talk about diversity of teamwork, because in this case, it is truly multidisciplinary approach. There are about 12 authors on that paper, which I led, but it's a work of a lot of people. And you talk about people from life sciences, computational biology, HPC, and similarly, all the other work I've done, which is shown on the slide here, have been multidisciplinary effort. And I don't know of other places whereby you can have such level of everyone with PhDs, but in different disciplines, trying to solve a problem. So real problem require a amount of disciplinary effort, team with respect for each other, but with diversity of opinion and diversity of experience. So I've been able to be involved in all of this project over the years. We've done a lot of presentation at SC. And again, I encourage you to come to get more details about the work we did on COVID-19. Please, next slide. So again, how did I get here? So all of the things I've told you about could not have happened if it has not been for the community that I've been part of. Now, my first time at SC was in 2008 as an undergraduate, as a graduate student. And I came to that SC on the platform of what they call the broader engagement program, which brings minorities into SC. And on getting to SC in 2008, I told myself that I can go beyond just being within the minority community, but I can do what other people are doing. And in 2010, really, I was able to get an award at the broader conference level, not just the minority level. But that opportunity was given to me because I initially came. I would not have come because I never had a paper, but I was given the opportunity to come in 2008. And 2010, I was able to get the award, get an internship at Lawrence Livermore, and I was able to get a full position at Lawrence Livermore. And this year, I've done a work we have done some work that is considered worthy enough for Golden Bear Prize. And Birali said earlier on that I'm involved in Black in HEILMEIER. Yes, because I believe that to whom much is given, much is expected. Oprah Winfrey said, when you take the elevator up, try to send it back down to bring other people up. And this is what I believe our diversity should result in bringing many people up. And that's why I'm part of this. So once again, thank you for the opportunity to be here.
All right. Thank you, Sam. We're gonna move on to women in high performance computing, and I would like to call on Sharon to take it away. Sharon?
Sharon, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, her audio doesn't seem to be connected.
I saw her actually. Yeah,
So
she is
on,
there.
But there is no audio.
I'm going to actually ask her to unmute. Yeah. I think she connected with phone with another probably device.
I guess while we are waiting for Sharon to join.
Okay.
Maybe, here you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I've been having some technical issues with our Wi-Fi. So thank you for asking me to talk about WHPC. I'll just start off by saying my name is Sharon Brody-Geva. I am the director of advanced research computing at the University of Michigan in the Office of Research. I'm a computational chemist by training. I am not American by birth. I'm Canadian and grew up in Europe and in Israel. So just joining the club of people who are now working in the US. I have over the years worked in industry, worked on putting together digital signal processors, worked on things like compilers for HPC, written simulations for HPC. I've now gone over mostly to the dark side of management, and even now even darker into administration at the university, but I have managed the technical team at times. I'm still involved in managing our consulting and training unit for the university. And I work a lot on policy and strategy. Over the years, I'm more and more interested in diversity and in workforce development. As I grow older, I'm more interested in mentoring people. And I think having a diverse and inclusive and equitable community is the most important thing. I'll just say that relevant to here, I'm on the Women in HPC Executive Board. I also run the Chapters program. And I have fabulous colleagues, one of whom I see here. Mojgan is also very active in Women in HPC. I'm also in many other national, international, regional boards and committees, including PERC. I got my pitch for PERC. If you don't know about it, PEARC. I'm the technical chair for next year for PERC 21, and I'm on the steering committee, among other things. So really everywhere possible to work on workforce development. So to the topic, women in high performance computing, also known as WHPC, is one of the things I'm very passionate about. Next slide, Brawley. I'm not going to read out all of these things, but our mission really is to promote, build, and leverage a diverse and inclusive HPC workforce. We do this. We do this by supporting women, but we also support any underrepresented aspect or group possible, because these things are mainly they go across any kind of underrepresentation. We call it Women in HPC mainly because this is a women-led organization, and we have though many male allies, and they are very important for the organization as well. We do want to increase the participation of women. We think that there's between 11 and 13% of conference participants who are women. And this is supercomputing, and that also includes women who are there, you know, as representatives of companies and aren't necessarily in the technical fields. So through collaborating and networking, WHPC strives to bring together women in HPC and technical computing while encouraging women to engage in outreach communities and improve the visibility of inspirational role models. You can see who our champions are here. WHPC is stewarded by the EPCC at the University of Edinburgh in the United Kingdom, but has members and volunteers from across the globe, and really from across the globe. Next slide. So WHPC has 6 main areas of focus. You can see here communication, dissemination, research, visibility, networking, and best practices. So I will just stress the research part. Marisol had put together a really good slide, so I won't repeat that. I mean, research continues to show that diversity is very, very important. If you have diversity, it is no good if you don't have inclusivity. Otherwise you lose people, or you don't attract more people. And part of inclusivity includes equity and equality. So all these things are tied together. And when people stop at the point of diversity, just saying, look at our stats, you haven't really done anything, because you're not going to retain people, and you're not going to attract the people that you really want to stay. Next slide. So these are just the main programs of Women in HPC. The chapters and affiliates program I'll talk about in a minute. The mentoring program, which has been fabulous. We've had in the past couple of years, we've had many mentees and mentors. I've actually been both a mentor and a mentee because we can all use mentoring. And it's another way, because you asked Barali about how can you make contacts. These are the things that we see as being important. There's webinars, but also there's this one-on-one contact. We have a fellowship program as well, and workshops at major HPC conferences. I don't know if any of you participated, but yesterday we had the Women in HPC SC20 workshop, and apparently there were the usual about 100 participants. So that is the number that we usually get. Usually they're in a room and we have fire codes, so we could probably have more, but it was impressive to see them, and we had some wonderful speakers yesterday. Next slide. So the chapters and affiliates program, I actually lead it. And it's, as you can see, I've bolded here where the current chapters and affiliates are from. So you can see that we've made a lot of progress, covering quite a few continents even. And the program is meant to enable local, regional, university, company, statewide, even countrywide or continent-wide groups to tailor activities and develop diversity and inclusion goals that are suitable to the needs of their local HPC communities, with the ability to share ideas and best practices between the chapters and affiliates. So affiliates are usually large associations or consortia that don't have many direct employees, or groups that are in the initial stages of creating a chapter specific to HPC. These chapters each have their own unique personality and character. You know, the important thing for us is that they maintain the mission of WHPC, and we don't tell them, you know, we don't give exclusivity. If a group wants to be a chapter, they can work with other chapters, and it can be representing whatever amount of people that they think need to be. You can see here that there's varying, you know, some of these are companies, some of these are single universities, some of them are statewide. So we feel very importantly that we should not be running things the way we don't like seeing organizations run, in a way that squelches individuality and diversity, quite honestly. Anyone who's interested in it can always contact info@womeninhpc.org. I'll show you the website, I believe, in a minute. Next slide. Yes, this is the information. The website is www.womeninhpc.org. You can be a member, an individual member of WHPC for free. You don't need to be in a chapter, and basically what you'll get are infrequent newsletters, but every person who joins WHPC gives us more of the ability to point out how large and inclusive the community really is. And no, you do not need to be a woman to join. We have, as I said, many male allies who are also interested and very active in some of these things. I think I'm not going to repeat. Marisol did a really good job of explaining why these things are important. I will just add in my 2 cents. I usually just divide up the need for DEI into 3 things, and different people take from it what they see as important. One of them is just, let's be pragmatic. We need workforce. We can't ignore more than half of the workforce. You need colleagues. We need people to do work. And that is sometimes the only reason that people are into diversity. But, you know, if it makes them into diversity, then so be it. The second thing is again, the importance of diversity. You can't develop, we're all working on products. We're all creating something. You cannot keep on having the same exact kind of person doing it and still expect different results. So this for you, you know, as a hiring manager should be important, but also when you think about your colleagues, and inclusion comes a lot from the group itself. It's not just you know, you as the manager giving promotions or things like that. And third, I'll echo what Marisol said too, just in a different way of putting it. It's the right thing to do, you know, and that everyone has to think about it. You can't have one small group taking control and maintaining control of all these things. It's not good for humanity for various reasons. And that is what I had.
Okay. Thank you very much, both Sam and Sharon and Marisol. This was a really great presentation, and I'm going to encourage you, if you have questions, to put them in the Slack. I believe we have some time to entertain a few of them. I see already one question here from Omer, who's asking that one of the main challenges he has been encountering is to be a foreign national. And he does understand the national security concern, but at the same time, there's been many opportunities missed because of being a foreign national. Can you, each one of you, maybe comment and maybe give an advice on somebody in that situation, what they could do?
I'll let Mirasu speak. I mean, she's
Even national labs, but we do have partners in industry that do the same kind of work and support our efforts at the national labs. So I'd encourage you to look beyond the national labs, right, to some of our partnerships. But national labs do take on foreign nationals. Our internships are open to all students. And for PhD level expertise, we do hire foreign nationals. There may be a smaller number of openings oftentimes, but there are openings. So I encourage you to continue to look, and as problems evolve in the nation and the world, then new openings will come and go, right? So yeah, just continue to pursue your efforts and expand your search to some of our collaborators.
So I would be remiss for not bringing up another question that happened quite often. We tend to use mentoring quite a bit extensively to mentor. So the whole concept of mentor and mentee, and there's always an assumption that being a mentor, you are already in a position of authority, usually higher. But I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on what I like to call, I like to refer in the literature, they refer to reverse mentoring, because when we deal with diversity, there's quite a bit to be learned from each side, and you can't be really mentoring when you really don't know where the person is coming from. But the right way to do would be really to first listen and learn. And I would argue I've learned quite a bit more from the people I've been mentoring than me mentoring them and making me the better person I became. Don't you think we should really rethink even the whole concept of mentoring program, mentor-mentee, and maybe being more of a two-way when it comes in particular to diversity in order to be effective?
Yeah, I'll say, and that's why I mentioned that for the WHPC mentoring program, I've been both a mentee and a mentor. And that was kind of a formal thing, but I would say that my mentees taught me, although they weren't officially formally my mentors, taught me a lot because, you know, there's one who was starting a graduate degree with a 3-month-old, for example, with no family in the US. You know, and it was something that I had done. I had done exactly the same thing when I was wrapping up a PhD with a baby and not in the country where I had grown up. So, you know, it made me, even though I had the same experience in some ways, it made me completely see it in a different way when she talked about it. It makes me see, you know, people who are not from the US, or people who are, you know, don't look like the majority or don't think like the majority. When they start talking to you, you suddenly realize that you come with your own biases as well. And I think that's very important too, to mention. So I think I like Barali's way of stating it. You know, maybe we talk about a mentoring program where we pair people together or triple people together, but we don't designate one as the mentor and one as the mentee. And I think we do that a lot. So Barali is a wonderful colleague of mine in many organizations and varying committees and things like that. You know, and I see people like Barali as my mentor, right? Even though we both have more or less the same title and we go to the same places, but when I sit down and talk to Barali, then I'm getting things that to me are mentoring. Sorry to pick on you, Barali, but you're in the center of my screen.
Marisol and Sam, any
Yeah,
thoughts?
I think, I mean, I agree with what both of you have said, and I think it's a mix of both, because if you are in my kind of feed, which is AI and all of that, you have to have a sense of humility to know that a grad student likely know more than you, because the feed is rapidly changing. Think about 10,000 publications in a year. There's no way you can exhaust all of that. So you need the humility to be able to understand that this, and I've worked with a lot of smart students. I know that this is my student, or is somebody I'm mentoring, but he actually knows a lot. But we also have to be mindful on the other side of, when it comes to things like leadership and administration, that sort of thing comes with experience. And I think in that realm, we you know, because navigating the work environment, you know, is not what you read in the papers, you know, it's not what you read from Harvard Law School or something. So you have to have the humility as well to know that regardless of the age, but that person that has gone beyond you has carried some experience that you can probably learn from. So it has to be a balance and a mix of both, and depends on the situation of what you're trying to get.
Yes, I completely agree with all of you. I will add that I think in mentoring, I like to host working groups as opposed to one-on-one mentoring, because I believe that each of us has a different personality. So we could benefit from, you know, a variety of people's opinions, right? And what I've learned most is I've learned about myself and my own insecurities as other young women voice their own insecurities or events that happen. And then I come to a realization, oh, you know, I feel that way too, but I never had, you know, the moment to actually notice that I too have that insecurity. But I think it is very important that we all acknowledge that even if we are more senior in career, that we also are learning from, you know, a younger in career individuals.
I know we are reaching the time. I really want to thank all our speakers and maybe end by these few concluding thoughts, and one in particular for the participant. And I'm going to refer to something Terry said yesterday, in particular when it comes to diversity and people for different backgrounds, is really related to overcoming what she referred to as the imposter syndrome. That belief that you are inadequate for something. I think for me that resonated me, and then remind me 30 years ago when I came to this country when I was going through. And I think for me, that's one that in particular when you are diverse, not be afraid to emit your opinion, to just feel that you can. Yes, you can. And for many of us that are in a position of making changes or belong to different organizations, I think the question of diversity and inclusion cannot just be a nice to have something, or because we have to meet some annual report that everybody nowadays is talking about it. We all agree that it's the right thing to do. We have always state the problem, but it's in reality, in effective solutions, there are less that is really being happening in that particular area. But we hope that in our HPC community, for those who are in decision making, they will make really headway in implementing workforce environment that really encourage diversity and inclusion. I'll just thank you all, and I'll pass the torch to my colleague Guido.
Hello. So it's my pleasure to take over now to invite 4 people from 4 different parts of the world. Not physically at the moment now anymore, but we thought that as we were setting this up, we expected actually ECP participants from many countries around the globe. It turns out while you have a diverse background, you're currently all working in the US.
No.
So well, from the participants. So nevertheless, we still thought that it might be beneficial to, look beyond the United States and give some geographical background or have some geographical diversity as well. And I invited people from, let's say, representative continents. So I didn't get Antarctica or Australia, but I thought Australia is so, is in the sense similar enough that they can be covered by the others. And Antarctica is actually, well, not really representative. So I'm happy that everybody agreed, which surprised me tremendously. So thank you all very much for taking the time here. So we have Ann Elster representing Europe. We have Veronica Vergara representing South America. We have Paresh Patani representing Africa. And we have Samit Gupta representing Asia, but he already mentioned that he has been actually everywhere. So maybe he can also cover Australia if he can. So to start this off, I would like to hand it over to my panelists, just to briefly introduce yourself and maybe a little bit of your global history in your work background. So where have you been? Do you have some experience? And maybe also in a brief sentence, how has this shaped you to be the person that you are right now? And I'll do this to be as inclusive as possible, just in alphabetical order of last name. So Anne, please go ahead.
Okay, so my name is Ann Elster, and I was born in the Arctic Circle in Norway. And then when I was a young child, I lived 3 years in a Western country called Monrovia, Liberia, West Africa. And that's where I had British teachers in an American system, and also an Indian American teacher. So that taught me, English is sort of like a native language, early. So that definitely influenced me from that end. Went back to Norway, graduated out of high school there, then got a scholarship to University of Oregon. So that's on the one side of the United States. And then continued my undergraduate degree at the University of Massachusetts, which is the other side of the United States, and got my graduate degrees out of Cornell. I then worked in industry in Texas, Austin, Texas, at Schlumberger before I went back to university at the University of Texas, and then returned to Norway in 2001. And I've now been almost 20 years here. So that's sort of my geographical diverse background, if you wish. I still maintain a home in Austin, Texas, and I also maintain a visiting position with the University of Texas. So every summer and all sabbaticals, except for this past summer because of COVID, I've been in the United States. So I'm also married to an American, and he also has some American Indian background. So we have quite a diverse family, I guess.
Thank you very much. Summit, you're up next.
So there's no way to beat Anne. There's just, I give up. Right, I just give up right now. So I'm Sumit Gupta, and I started. I was born in India, in the middle of India, in a small town that only the Indians would know about. But I was very young when my parents moved to Kuwait, and so I grew up in Kuwait. Did all my schooling all the way from elementary to high school. I was in Kuwait when the Iraqis invaded, so I'm actually officially a refugee. I escaped on a cargo ship. I went back to India, finished my 12th grade there, and went to university there, undergraduate degree from India in Delhi. And then I worked in Bangalore for a couple of years. Then I moved to California, to Southern California. I did my PhD, graduate work in SoCal, in Irvine, and then postdoc in San Diego. And then since then, I've been living up in Northern California in the Bay Area. I have spent a summer working at IMEC in Belgium. So I have some European work history as well. And I've worked in Intel a summer in Oregon as well. But I haven't really lived for a long time in the East Coast and never been to Australia, unfortunately, Guido. So I can't really give any Australian perspective. But that's my multicultural, multi-country experience.
I had my last trip to New Zealand. My last international trip was to New Zealand in February, and a week later the world shut down. I thought I was going to be stuck in Dubai on the way back. How's that? They're starting to shut down the China and other routes. So that's another story.
Yeah. On business and tourism, I've been to maybe 30, 40, maybe more countries. So, but that's only visiting.
Yeah, I visited 100 probably.
I guess I'm next, right? Paresh? Yeah. So I want to first start with acknowledging Birali's sales skills. He's the one who recruited me and put me in touch with Guido. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Guido?
Totally fine. One of the many ways how it can be pronounced.
Yeah. So yeah, very diverse journey. And I noted you, Guido, doing quotes when you said Africa. So I don't know why you quoted, because I don't look like African. I don't know why, but yeah. So anyway, so let me start. I was born in a place called Moshi in Tanzania, which is at the foothills of Mount Kilimanjaro. Very pretty place. And my mother was born there as well. So it's we have a lot of connection into that region. And I grew up mostly in Dar es Salaam, capital of Tanzania. Went to high school there, early part of high school. Then I transitioned to India because I wanted to explore, engineering opportunities, and it seemed like a good place to be. So I did my high school in Gujarat, in India, and then joined IIT Bombay. It's in Mumbai for my undergraduate degree. And after I finished that, I went to Canada, University of British Columbia, to get my master's and PhD. So my initial degree was, first degree from IIT Bombay was civil engineering. Then I continued in civil engineering, but with a lot of focus on computational methods and technologies in British Columbia. And I finished my PhD and went to Austin for my postdoc and spent about a year, and then joined NEC in Houston, Texas, and worked with them for about 12 years and traveled extensively to Japan as well. And so I'm sort of building up to the fact that, I've lived a lot in Tanzania, a lot in US, but spent more than 5 years in India, spent more than 5 years in Canada. So very, very diverse background. And also did my postdoc at University of Texas at Austin. So there is a connection. And to Austin, I love Austin. I would be willing to go there anytime. Right now I'm in Portland, Oregon. So connection with Sumit there, he did internship, right, Sumit, at Intel? I know Sumit for a long time as well. So connection there. Yeah. And so I guess now let me tell tell you what I'm doing. I'm at Intel Corporation in Portland, Oregon. I'm a senior director for developer products and for support and consulting. Been there for almost 20 years. And because of my background, I strongly feel because of my background, I'm managing a very diverse team in multiple aspects. You know, in my team, we have all ethnicities. We have a very good ratio of male versus female. And I have teams in US, China, India, Germany, Russia, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and Malaysia. You might think, wow, so many countries. But we have to be where our customers are because my team is customer facing, HPC and software oriented team. So anyway, I'll stop there. I felt that my background really helped me manage a diverse in many aspects type of a team.
Last but not least, Veronica.
I thank you for the invite, Guido and Berali. It's nice to be here. So my name is Veronica Melesa Vergara, and I'm originally from Ecuador, Quito, Ecuador, and I've been in the US since 2005, I want to say. So I moved here. I was doing my university degree in Ecuador as an electronics engineer, but I came to US to actually Portland, Oregon. So we have the Oregon connection, all the panelists. And I came for an exchange program for a year to read college. So I came here to study just for a year, and I was taking courses, but then I liked it. So I applied to transfer, and I finished my degree at Reed College in physics and math instead of engineering, since it's a small liberal arts school. So they don't have engineering, but
sorry to interrupt you, but there's an Oregon connection, right?
Yeah, there is an Oregon connection.
Yeah, all of us.
But I lived in Oregon for 4 years, and the last year I was there, I worked at webmd.com. So I was in industry, and for a little bit, I was sent to the Boston office. So I was in the East Coast for a little bit, but my main home was in Oregon. And then I was tired from all the rain. I love the green part, but I just need the sun. I'm from Ecuador. I need to see the sun. So I applied for grad school, and I ended up moving to Florida. So it was completely opposite side as far as I could from the rain. So I did my grad school at Florida State and got my master's there. And I was involved with SC. So I started learning about all the career opportunities that are possible in industry, in HPC, in national labs and academia. So I moved to Purdue University in Indiana to work at their HPC center there. And I learned a lot about how they run systems and how the HPC center was actually being built and run and managed. And then after a little while, I was involved with SC, and I found a connection. I was networking with people that brought me to my current job. Now I'm at Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee. So I've lived in lots of parts of the US, but I think I'm about to cross to the point where in a couple of years, it'll be longer that I've lived in the US than in Ecuador, which makes me sad, but I like living here, and it's been nice. But one thing I wanted to say is when I moved to US, the thing that I appreciate the most was all the people in my school. It was a small school, but there were people from everywhere. I have friends from Nepal, Ghana that became lifelong friends that I would have never met had I not come to US. And my husband is from Ethiopia, so there's a little bit of diverse in our family as well.
A lot of African connections too.
Yeah.
So it seems to be a common theme that we're hearing here is that exploring the world, working in different places has broadened your horizons. So if you were to recommend the participants, that are just starting their careers to apply for positions in your part of the world that you're representing here, or any of the parts that you're experienced with, let me broaden this even more. What would you tell them that they should keep in mind, or that they should pay special attention to? And let's do the same order here.
Okay, so I don't know what the background, unfortunately, from your audience is. If they're finishing their PhDs, there's a great program in Europe called ERCIM, ERCIM, that will offer 1 year PhD postdocs at partner institutions throughout Europe. And I strongly recommend them taking a look at that and contacting then faculty members like myself at higher education institution in Europe. And also Fraunhofer is also in Germany, is also part of it. And those are great opportunities that would, basically offer scholarships at the international level. And people love to see people from all over. That's number one I can think of. I'm sure there are other, regular positions for PhD students. If you're, in fact, I'm going to be hiring 2 new PhDs, one very soon that I'm announcing, and one that I'm also soon announcing, one by next summer, in the area of GPU computing, high performance computing, and also a little bit of AI. So, in Norway, they are all posted on jobbnorge.no. So, again, you can contact me if you're interested in coming to Norway. I'm sure there are other sites. I know we used to have a big site for the Nessus network, the largest ultra-scale computing network in Europe, used to advertise positions. But of course, a lot of the main society channels will also show positions if you want to go on a short-term basis on the academic side. For business or for industry internships, I believe there are, and here I think Sumit and Paresh can tell more about, because there are international companies that hire worldwide, and I'll let them talk about that. How's that? So I figured I'd cover the academic side since that's where I'm in.
Yeah, what I did was I just reached out to people in the research community that I knew. And, my first year, after my first year in my PhD program, I wanted to go to Europe. So I just reached out to IMEC, people who were publishing in my field. And I said, hey, I'm, looking for something. And I actually reached out to a lot of people and then, got a few bites out of it. I think I highly encourage, for me, it was amazing. I was there at the internship for about 6 or 8 weeks. And then I took 2 or 3 weeks to backpack through Europe. And then every weekend also I would get on a train Friday evening and, go off somewhere, right? And so I traveled all of Europe. I just backpacked through Europe in that summer. And it's just an amazing experience, right? There's only sometimes in your life you can do that. Now, in companies too, right? Like with, at least I'm at IBM, and at IBM, it's very easy for us to get a temporary job in another country, or for any of you to apply for internships or specific countries that you're interested in. We have I think offices in like 170 countries. So I think I encourage it. I think Guido, your perspective, or the reason you pulled this together, is that if you look at the value of what the multicultural or multi-country experience gives you, is the most important thing it gives you is it opens your mind. It opens your mind to people, food, culture, religion, languages. Just like like now I go to a new country and I'm not saying, man, that's weird. I'm thinking, why do they do that? Right? Because I know there's a good reason they do that. Because every country has a good reason for doing whatever they're doing, right? They've been doing it for centuries. So I think it opens your mind, and frankly, in our work, in the research world, the most important thing you can do is open your mind, because ideas will come when your mind is open.
And I don't know, do we have undergraduates here? I don't know how diverse this panel is, but for Norway, in my institution, master's degrees, we don't have scholarship, but there's no tuition, and that's kind of unique in Europe, that we don't have tuition even for international students, at least for now. So that's another, you can look for, and at our master's program if you're looking for that, or if you have a master's like in business and want to have a master's in computing, that's another. I just forgot to mention that.
Turning it over to Paresh.
Yeah, I echo everything that was said before me by Anne and Sumit. One thing I will point out, that every company nowadays values the international experience a lot. I'm pretty sure IBM, Intel, or if you have an international experience, you are on a fast track in your leadership development and things like that. So I would urge people to, if they are from US and have lived their whole life in US or Canada or something like that, getting an opportunity to go out would be great. And as Sumit mentioned, Intel has offices all over the world as well. There are several places where my team is there, and if you're interested in those areas, and Intel offers internships, we are very heavily recruit the interns, and sometimes that leads to a permanent job. But if you're just really wanting to experience certain part of the world, please reach out to me and I can provide you local contact that you can apply for internships and things like that. Now for Africa, I think probably Birali is more qualified than me to say where to go for opportunities, because Birali does so much work there and he's always, wanting people to go there with him, and maybe COVID has stopped that, but I would love to go with Birali. He's in East Africa, I'm in East Africa, so it's a great connection, and there is a lot of opportunity to be there and help with the IT infrastructure development. Supercomputing is a big deal, and countries like Tanzania and South Africa and some countries in North like Egypt and others are developing this technology very much. And it would be really great experience. It will open your eyes to completely different world. And by the way, it's a very well-developed world. It's not like people are running around, in jungles and stuff like that. All the metropolitan areas look a lot like you would see in the Western world. So there's nothing to be scared or afraid of. You can go there and have a really great time. Birali, would you like to add one or two sentences on opportunities in Africa?
Yeah, I thank you, Paresh. Actually, I will even echo Paresh in saying that among most of the continent, I would argue there is a lot of growth in particular in high performance computing. Many countries are actually focusing on knowledge development actually in the workforce. And if you look at a lot of in the science questions, the amount of data being accumulated, it's on the roadmap of most of the countries. I think there's really a lot of opportunities. But where I would like to also echo, and perhaps this might be a surprise for Paresh, is in addition to just having those opportunities in class, but the intercontinental mentorship and the learning opportunities to bridge the gap is where actually many countries are really trying to seek and see how we can foster that. And usually that you don't need to necessarily leave the country, and all of these international companies also have a satellite on the continent. And there's also a lot of university are also building a satellite in the continent as well. But it's also the ability of understanding that these also African scholars can play a role at par to their international counterpart. And for me, and Paresh, you might not know this, I always remember my first time, maybe probably 18 years ago, I attended my first Intel roundtable. And I went in this room and I could not see anybody that looked about me. And I was very shy, I didn't speak very good English. And then I was walking around and I happened to stand next to you. And we struck a conversation. And lo and behold, at the end, I found this person who spoke an African language that I spoke. And suddenly he made me so comfortable that I've been attending Intel meeting ever since. Because the next year, I knew I was gonna go because and I was looking for him and I found him again because at least I knew one person. And then he was giving me the advice that really kind of encouraged me. So there are this mentorship, a mentor, sometimes you don't know where you're gonna find him, but and once you find him is the one that will can even shape you in one way, shape, or form. And I think for me, those unstructured were difficult to find, let's say, a new early career person. How can that person find their own Paresh, for example? And those are things that even Africa also might need.
Yeah, you're giving me a lot of credit, but I've enjoyed working with you for last 18 years. Yeah.
Giving also a chance to Veronica to you know, move people to South America.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I definitely, there's a lot of, especially in the HPC world, we're trying to form this collaboration. It's called America's HPC collaboration that connects like South America, Central America with like US, Canada, and Mexico, so that there's a bunch of networks that people are not necessarily aware of globally, like Escalac, and there's a conference that is like SC that happens in like usually somewhere in South America or Central America. Although some years is also last year, actually this year, it was supposed to be held in Ecuador, and I was gonna go, but obviously pandemic doesn't work out so well. But that's one way I think is very important. If you're involved in all this type of networks that are like kind of like a virtual network, like people are involved in the field of HPC and they set up collaborations, they set up partnerships. We're trying to get folks also involved with the labs. So national labs have resources, and our resources are open to anybody in the world. So we want to open those resources so people are aware that they can apply. And that way, I definitely encourage you to consider like moving to a different country. Like it was I guess a scary experience for me when I moved here. I was 19, but I was just trying to see what is out there, and it turned out really well. And it was scary at first. And I think Birali mentioned like I had learned English in school, like throughout like school in Ecuador, you learn English, but you don't actually have to speak. Like you have to like, you know the grammar, you know the things, but you don't actually have to actually have a conversation. So that was like a big like slap in the face when I got here, because I was like, I know what you said and I know what I want to say, but the words don't actually come out. So that was a bit like kind of like an interesting thing that I didn't think it would happen, because I knew it. Like I've watched TV in English like since I was a kid, but when you actually have to have a conversation, that became like, oh crap, I need to practice more. But I think if you don't take the chance, especially when you're in an early career, you have more opportunity, more mobility. Like you can go somewhere and experience something new, and maybe you like it, maybe you don't like it, but it's always like easier when you're in your early careers to explore new things and see if there's things you can find. And there are centers in all over South America that have HPC, and I'm happy to tell you more about them if anybody's interested in exploring those.
Yeah, I would just want to mention real quick, because I see we're running out of time, that I'm this BOF co-chair at SC this year. And we have a BOF at 1 p.m. Eastern time on European HPC tomorrow, and same time, I made that sure that it's easier to remember, on the Thursday for the Americas HPC. So she reminded me of that. And those are great places. That's of course for networking within Europe and networking within Americas, but that would be a great place to meet people from those two continents at least.
I had so many more questions, but and I guess we could continue this for as long as you know, as the attendees would like. But thank you very much. I also want to give David, who's up next on allyship, the time to give his presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time in the evening or during the day for the people on the East, and early morning on the West Coast. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Hey, how are you?
Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Yeah.
Asante
So
bueno, Cuba.
you're in Austin or you're in Illinois?
Illinois.
Okay.
I never
Nice
moved.
to see you. Yeah.
Yeah.
CJ, take care.
So as a last part of the diversity session, I wanted to, it was my personal task, no, not task. I wanted to include something on allyship, because I had this eye-opening talk by one of our team members who actually represented a minority in one of our internal team meetings, where she talked about data and the concept of privilege and allyship. And the wonderful thing is that David, in an earlier meeting, mentioned that he just went through a workshop on this concept. So I asked him whether he would be comfortable and able to share what he's learned on his position, how his position comes with privileges, and how he can be an ally to other minorities. So with this, David. Okay, we don't hear you, but we have slides, so.
Yeah, somebody muted me magically. Hopefully now it's better. So I too had a sort of an inspirational experience with a talk on ally skills given by someone else. In my case, it was a woman named Valerie Aurora, and I heard this at the Carpentries Conference in Dublin in 2018. And fortunately for me, the slides that she gave, essentially, they make available under a Creative Commons license. And when I was thinking about what I wanted to say in this talk, I realized that Valerie pretty much said everything better than I possibly could. So I'm actually presenting Valerie's slides here. And so I really want to acknowledge that. All the faults are mine in the presentation. Valerie does a really great job. So, so who am I? I'm a researcher in HPC at Oak Ridge National Lab. I was a manager for 8 years with a group of 20 to 40 people at various times. And I've spent 20 plus years leading and participating in large R&D projects, mostly in the Department of Energy labs in the US. As you can see, I'm a white male of a certain age. I'm really at the very beginning of trying to learn and practice ally skills. I do not in any way claim to be an expert, but I mentioned I went to this inspirational talk, and I'll explain some of why it resonated with me as we go through this. A little bit later, my employer offered their diversity and inclusion training called the Courageous Leaders Summit. That was interesting. It wasn't really ally skills, but it did spend a lot of time talking about privilege, which is a component that we'll discuss here. And it was very valuable in that respect. And then last year, or earlier this year actually, this summer, as Guido mentioned, I had a chance to actually participate in one of Valerie's ally skills workshops, and that was a really nice experience as well. So this is not the Ally Skills Workshop. I really highly recommend that. It's about a 3-hour thing, mostly group discussion. And she did it online in the case that I attended. Very nice event. So what are ally skills? We need to start with some terminology. You've heard several times during the last couple of days this term ally. Allies are related to a couple of other ideas here. First is privilege. Privilege in this context is an unearned advantage given by society to some people, but not to all. And oppression is a systematic, pervasive inequality that's present throughout society that benefits people with privilege and harms people with fewer privileges. A marginalized person is a member of a group that's a primary target of a system of oppression, and an ally is a member of a social group that enjoys some privilege who is working to end oppression and understand their own privilege. And these are actions that allies take. And so we'll discuss the idea that being an ally is about taking actions, and we'll talk about some of the actions that allies should be thinking about. So here's an example to help set the context. And I would say in this Courageous Leaders Summit that I attended, we spent about 4 hours going through the idea of privilege in many different respects. It's very illuminating. And different people oftentimes have different kinds of privilege in different contexts. So one case to think about is your ability to walk into a convenience store and not have the owner assume that you're there to buy things, not to steal them. Right? The oppression that goes along with this is a system of stories that people tell and retell, news coverage, police and legal system, stereotyping particular people as criminals who are likely to steal from convenience stores. And this obviously benefits non-Black people and harms or oppresses Black people. So in this case, a marginalized person in the context of this particular case is any Black person who wants to enter a convenience store. And an ally is generally a non-Black person who, for example, donates to the legal system to help reform it, or who actively objects when they hear people telling racist stories about things like this, or calls their representatives to support police reform, or informs themselves about what's going on in contexts like this. Another example of privilege might be the ability to interview for a job and have the interviewer assume that if you have children, you'll still continue doing a good job at work. And this goes particularly to women, right? Family members' expectations that women take on most of the childcare are quite common. Fathers using paternity leave for other things than childcare often. And the belief that mothers don't want to return to full-time paid work after they've had children. So obviously the marginalized person here would be any woman who wants to work for pay for an employer and might be of an age to have children. And an ally, for example, might be a man who takes on significant childcare responsibilities or donates to women's causes or uses paternity leave to participate in childcare, or speaks up at work against stereotypes about mothers, or informs themselves about these situations and relative privileges and advantages that they may have. So what do diversity and inclusion mean? Diversity is the state of having people in a group who differ along a wide variety of lines. And inclusion is the idea that everyone in a diverse group is valued, included, and respected without discrimination or bias. So, of course, an individual can't be diverse, right? Diversity only exists in the context of a group. And as you have probably realized, many efforts focus on increasing diversity, but they don't pay so much attention to the inclusion aspect, right? So it's quite possible to build a group that has more diversity, a workforce or whatever it is, project team. But if you don't also pay some attention to making it inclusive, ultimately you're likely to lose people who might feel marginalized and oppressed. What's wrong with diversity and inclusion today? Well, the challenge is that most work focuses on changing marginalized people and changing their situation directly, and less work focuses on changing allies. There's a lot of good reasons to focus on changing marginalized people. It's kind of an obvious thing to do in some respects. They directly benefit from the change and are therefore maybe more self-motivated to participate. They're often more aware of the oppression that's going on. This is kind of a negative thing, but they're often lower status and it's easier to tell them what they should be doing. Sometimes they're seen as the cause of the problem, although oftentimes in cases of gender discrimination and sexual harassment, it's actually the men that are causing the problem, but it's somehow oftentimes, or at least sometime back, it was still often blamed on women. They were being, provocative or something like that, right? We've all heard these stories. Another advantage of focusing on marginalized people is that it avoids confronting feelings of guilt in privileged people. So why not focus on marginalized people? Well, there's some really good reasons for that. First of all, marginalized people are already overworked. Studies show that people in marginalized groups have to work extra hard. They have to do their own job and they have to do it, twice as well, have to do twice as much, right? On the left is Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, and there's an old saying that Ginger Rogers did everything Fred Astaire did backwards and in high heels. But what's the name that you think of? You recognize Fred Astaire. Many people aren't so familiar with Ginger Rogers. Right, and there's an interesting book called What Works for Women at Work that looks at, does surveys and examines some of the issues that women find at work, including women of color, which is not always common. And I think we've all heard the tale that, a woman or a Black person or whatever really has to be twice as good to get to the same level in a white-oriented, male-oriented world. And that's a real experience that many people have. Another concern is that marginalized people are under a lot more stress. They're the subjects of discrimination and harassment and abuse and assault in some cases. And this can actually lead to people developing post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's a real challenge, and we don't necessarily want to put more on them. Marginalized people also tend to have less money. These are some statistics about from the US about different marginalized groups and their financial positions. And you can see there's disadvantage across the board there. Marginalized people are often retaliated against. There was a study that's quoted here from 2016. Minority or female leaders who engaged in diversity valuing behaviors were penalized with worse performance ratings, whereas males or ethnic majority leaders who engaged in similar behaviors were not penalized for doing so. Here's another issue. Marginalized people are often, oops, I clipped the title there, sorry. Marginalized people are often in the minority. And these are just a couple of graphs. Open source contributors, strongly dominated by men. It's a little bit better in the case of Wikipedia editors, but this gives you some ideas if you didn't know it before. And this is one of the things that was really key to me about the ally concept, right? I was from my perspective as a manager at the time, I was looking at how can I get more people involved in this, right? There's hopefully a small number of marginalized people, and there are a lot more people around who it's hard to engage if you just focus on the marginalized people. So for me, allies and developing ally skills looked like a really plausible way to get more people engaged in this discussion and helping people. Another challenge, marginalized people tend to have less power and influence. If you look, this was back in, I think, 2014, looking at the Fortune 500 CEOs, very small percentages were from marginalized groups, women, Black, openly gay. The second quote here notes that the probability that a woman occupies a top management team position is 51% lower if there's another woman on the same team. This is basically saying, hey, we've got our token woman, we don't need any more. And the image on the right is the Smurf, the one woman Smurf in this huge group of male Smurfs, the token girl in the thing. Marginalized people are often seen as whiny and selfish. So this is something that Valerie herself experienced. She was in a discussion about codes of conduct for conferences. And so in this whole thread, she was posting an example of a conference code of conduct. And somebody responded, so do you actually code or contribute to the open source community in any tangible way, or do you just bitch and moan about having a period and write conference conduct policies? And they tagged it at the end, trying to say it's a legitimate inquiry. And actually the interesting point about this is before she moved into specializing in diversity and inclusion, Valerie was actually a Linux kernel developer and file system developer, and was responsible for some very significant contributions to the Unix and Linux code bases. So she really, this person obviously didn't know what they were saying. So there are a lot of resources out there for marginalized groups, and people love to write books and create organizations, resource groups, and things like that to support marginalized groups, and that's all very good. Unfortunately, in the ally skills context, there's a lot less out there at the moment, and this is one of the reasons why it's, I think, really opportune and important to focus on ally skills. Allies tend to have more time and energy than marginalized people. Allies tend to have more money, as we've seen. They're less likely to be harmed if they speak up or intervene in a negative setting. They're often in the majority. They have more power and influence. And it's often seen as altruistic or giving or kind to act as an ally. So what do good ally skills look like? Well, one important thing is that an ally self-educates, and an important aspect of that that goes back to some of the comments earlier about reading about privilege and trying to understand. It also means that you should not be asking people from marginalized groups to spoon feed you information, right? These are not the only sources of information about these kinds of experiences, and it takes more of their time. And as we've discussed, they're already taxed. So, you know, there may be some people who are willing to spend time in these kind of discussions, but it's not something you should try to impose to say, I want to be an ally. It's your job to help me, educate me, right? It's your job to educate yourself about this. And Ally Listens, this goes back to the Grace Hopper Conference, which probably you've mostly heard of. It's a now very large 20,000 plus people conference focusing on women in computing, very broad. This goes back, I think, to 2014. Somebody organized a panel session on male allies, and it had featured four male executives from big corporations like Google and Facebook and others, and they talked on the stage while several thousand women listened in the audience. And predictably, it was a bit of a disaster, with every panelist sticking his foot in his mouth several times during the session. So after realizing what a disaster it was, one of the panelists, Alan Eustace, who was at Google at that time, I think, scheduled a new panel. And in this case, he organized the men to sit on the side and listen while women told about their experiences. And it was very, very eye-opening. It's important aspect of being an ally to give credit. There are studies that show that women, for example, get less credit for co-authoring than other authors when they're listed alphabetically, which is may not be so common in computer science, but there are fields where that's the traditional way to list the authors. And it's also important that an ally asks for consent when possible. There may be repercussions to marginalized people that you're trying to help by intervening or acting in certain situations. And so when possible, it's good to ask to make sure that the people you're trying to help are okay with that. Now, there may be some cases where you don't have a chance to step in, but you know, there are especially longer term things. If you think about test cases in the courts and things like that, right? The first people to do the legal battles for same-sex marriage or for other things, right? These kind of things, they get a lot of publicity, possibly unwanted, oftentimes negative in many respects. And this may not be the same thing you're going to experience if you're going to intervene in some, you know, much smaller scale event, but it is the, you know, representative of the kind of backlash that could experience, marginalized people could experience. An ally keeps the focus on the marginalized people. So this is a thread from Twitter where the first person says, shout out to my girls out there who want to be visible in the tech community, but also want to have family and choose because the earth is terrible. And somebody responds, it's a problem for fathers too. Balancing networking and family isn't easy for anyone. And then somebody steps in and brings it back. As a dad, I'm going to say, go ahead and say it's objectively harder for moms. And what he's doing here is bringing the focus back to the marginalized group. And you've seen this in recent months where the Black Lives Movement was getting a lot of visibility, and there was where people were saying, well, we should value all lives, which is exactly this conversation in a different context. And so bringing that conversation back to Black lives is important as well. There are contexts where an ally can help by speaking up and drawing fire and not expecting a marginalized person to have to do it. So here is somebody speaking up about things they saw at a conference. Some speakers were misogynistic and violated the code of conduct for that conference. And this was a a cis white woman. There was also some so trans misogyny, as it says here in the quote, and she stepped up and called the behavior out, and actually the organizers did expel the speakers, and the speakers actually came back, not came back, but they apologized via Twitter for what they had said. But you know, you also have to use your energy wisely. So here's an example. Somebody says, why do you ignore the real disadvantages that poor people have? Statistically, rich black and white people are equally unlikely to go to prison or to be killed by the police. Actually, that's false, and there's studies that show that, but it's easy in situations like this to get into a big flame war. So how do you avoid something like that? Well, one way is called Charles' rules of argument. First of all, don't go looking for an argument. State your position once, speaking to the audience, wait for the absurd replies to come in, reply one more time just to correct misunderstandings of your first statement, and then go off and leave it alone and find something fun to do. Don't let it run on forever. Allies use their social capital. And as we said, allies, they're oftentimes far more numerous than the marginalized people that they might want to help. And so perforce, they have larger networks that they can tap into to also help out. Allies act even when it's uncomfortable. So if you may be in a situation, a small group, and for example, somebody's in a wheelchair and somebody else is using words like lame or other things that may not be appropriate, and you may think that's uncomfortable. Well, imagine how the person in the wheelchair feels about it. So you may be uncomfortable, but the marginalized person is probably more uncomfortable. An ally is also willing to sacrifice their own personal gain. What you see here is a fairly common panel discussion at a technical event, 5 white males. In some cases, when these panels are being organized, somebody might ask, well, who are the panelists that you've invited? And if that person is senior enough that they don't need really to have the exposure of a panel, and you have 4 white men, maybe as such a person, as an ally, you could recommend somebody else, a woman, person of color, somebody else who might benefit from the exposure and might help balance, do a little bit towards getting a little more diversity onto the panel and things like that. It's also important for allies to follow leadership of people in the marginalized group. So rather than telling people in the marginalized groups what they should be doing, find out what would help them. And of course, this is a challenging process. Allies will make mistakes, and so it's important to recognize that and accept it. And apologize when you realize you've made a mistake, and go off and try to educate yourself a little more about what led to making that mistake. And then you can come back and try to do a better job the next time. So as I've mentioned, this Ally Skills workshop that I attended was a really excellent introduction to these things, spending several hours in group discussion, working through scenarios. There's also kind of a newsletter called Dear Ally. And if Valerie or one of her team from Frameshift Consulting is giving a talk somewhere, or others are talking about Ally Skills, I encourage you to pursue that. So to wrap up, most diversity and inclusion efforts focus on marginalized people, but they have less time and energy and power and influence. Allies are more numerous, they have more ability to make change, and ally skills can be learned. So maybe we should focus on learning some ally skills and putting them into practice. And I don't know if we have any time for discussion, but I'm open.
Thank you very much, David. So So far, we don't have anything on the Zoom. And
Okay.
so let me ask you basically, before I maybe chime in. So have you practiced or have you been an ally in any of these ways? And could maybe share that experience?
I try to be. I will say that I have probably not yet had the very specific experiences so far that that we discussed in the workshop. But I would say I have been, as an organizer of many events, I've been very attuned, try to be very attuned to the diversity of the speakers that I invite, the panelists and things like that. And I'm far from alone in that. I don't really have to advocate for that too much, but it's something that I think is important and I try to pay attention to. And it's just one simple example that's within the power of many of us.
Thank you.
I think, Guido, I think we are up to our time, allocated time. I think on behalf of myself and Guido, I wanted to also reiterate again our thanks to all the panelists. And this was a very, very good session. And we just hope it's just a beginning for many conversations, and one that I hope each one of you will continue to become an ally or think about diversity and inclusion. At this point, we just want to pass it back to CJ and Sunit.
Great. Thanks so much. Just really like to express thanks to all of the organizers and the panelists and the people who have shared so much wisdom, but most especially the participants. I just call out Mojgan, for example, who participated in this last year and has really jumped up to provide a lot of help and assistance for everything that's happened here too. So again, just a couple very brief highlights. Let's all just remember that we're on this journey and we're on this journey together, and that being allies is just a great way to work together. In Swahili, there's a word for this, twaweza, we can do it together. And so I again really highlight whatever opportunities you have, as we're brought up in the last set of panelists, to understand your audience, to understand the people that you're speaking with, and to try to climb out of your own world and into theirs. So it makes a huge difference, right, for being able to find commonality and respect and appreciate them. Lord knows we all need a lot more of that in the world around us. I also really wouldn't underestimate your ability to help other people and to act as a mentor. Even if you're hey, what do I know? I'm only in my first 5 years. Well, you've got a lot of life years experience under you already. And finding other people that you can work together with can have a huge impact. So we're really delighted we're together. Go find some people to mentor. Go pick your mentors carefully that you think can really help you. Find ways to collaborate. And you're welcome to stay in touch. We had a Slack channel. There was some interest in a LinkedIn channel. I didn't see a whole lot happen with that. But let Matthew know if you're interested in that, and we can get something rolling there. Anybody else have any closing comments? And by the way, I did put a few of the demographics. You're welcome to suggest other categories that we may have data for in the landing page. But any other closing comments as we wrap up?
Just echoing CJ's comments here. So, hats off to you all participants. Just like I said yesterday, you're here. So that's your step one, right? That's a wonderful baby step you've already taken. And thanks a ton to the committee members, to the panelists and the organizers. Without you folks, we couldn't have done this. So it's just amazing. And looks like 6 hours was not enough, clearly. We have so much to discuss. And like CJ said, Slack is open. You all have asked such wonderful questions, such insightful questions that makes us think. Right, so please keep it coming, and can't emphasize. Let's share, let's support, let's guide each other, and let's get to where we want to be together.
Yeah, many thanks to you. Sunita is a great vice chair here too, so I appreciate it.
Likewise.
We'll be collecting the presentations and making them available as well. So keep on the watch the Slack channel for that.
And you can see in the landing page, there's a link there to the folder that the presentations will be in. So you'll be able to find stuff there.
Moshkin, do you want to say a few words?
No, thank you. Thanks to everyone. And yeah, I mean, it was great. I was happy that I attended the session. I mean, the early career program last year. And as of today, I found a mentor for myself.
Ah, there you go. Wonderful. Thanks for all your help.
All right. Thanks and all the best, everybody. Take care.
Have a wonderful computing.
And stay
Thank
healthy.
you.
Bye. Take care.